Travels with Geordie. This is your first visit. My name is Peter Knowles and I live on a pair of classic wooden motor cruisers here in Victoria, British Columbia, along with my lovely girlfriend Andrea and the loving memory of my pup Geordie, all while fixing both the boats up for some pretty ambitious cruising. If that's the sort of thing you might find interesting, please consider sticking around and subscribing. I'd love to have you. Well, this week we're back aboard MV Geordie working in the forward head. First off, I'll get these portholes out, and well, this one is just loose. It's been loose for years, so well, that was very straightforward. The starboard side hasn't quite come loose yet, but I suspect it will because it's the same detailing. Let's just see if I can. Yes, I can just encourage that out. Very nice. Very nice. Without too much drama. There we go. Lovely. So first off is to get the portholes off their wooden rings and determine what kind of shape those are in. They're held on with a bunch of standard screws, and I'll see if I can get these out without too much drama. They are bronze, which is lovely. And strangely, they break very easily. This is very odd. These are just crumbling. Oh my god. Not the way I like to remove screws, but sadly effective. Okay, well, I'm very curious to see what this is, but I think it's probably rubbish. It certainly weighs the equivalent of rubbish. Loss. This is just punky junk, which means I have to make some new mahogany rings. Fun. Now, these are not the sought-after Wilcox Crittenden bronze portholes that so many boats built on this coast are adorned with. The first clue for me was the missing screw hole here, and the Wilcox Crittenden stamp that's usually here, WC, along with the number 8 because it's an 8-inch porthole. However, they are very nice and they're pretty much identical. They've suffered a little bit in that this one is missing one of its hinge pins, so I'm going to take it apart and make sure it doesn't suffer any further in the meantime. On a Wilcox Crittenden, these hinge pins are bronze pins with cotter pins holding them in. On this one, they are threaded, and the likelihood of this coming apart happily is not very high, as I've just broken it off. I fully expected that to happen, so we'll just have to cope with that after the fact, which probably means drilling out and replacing with pins of another sort. Yeah, this is going to be a project. Okay. They also take the same standard 8-inch porthole gasket at the Wilcox Crittenden do, and these are actually available. I can put the part number down in the description for you. They're very hard to find, but every once in a while you'll come across them somewhere, and I got a couple off eBay and a couple more through my local chandlery, so they are out there. It's a square cross section rubber gasket, and this one could probably be reused even though it's split. I'm going to try a little harder on this side because it is going to be difficult to get those broken studs out of there. So I'm going to use a little heat and some WD-40. But before I get the heat going, let's get this rubber gasket out of here.
Now this one's pretty dry. Here we go. Okay, a little heat. By the way, if you're not using these Bernzomatic trigger torches with a carburetor in them so they work upside down, you're missing out on something extraordinary. Plus, I hope you're using MAP gas, which burns a lot hotter than propane. I'll put a link to this down below. Tiny little rotations, but I'm not confident. There's a certain feel that is twisting off that is not unscrewing, and this is the twisting off feel. Of course, I could confirm that by putting my finger on here, but it's hotter than stink right now. Whew. This is not going to end well for me. Yep, and that's where she broke off. Oh, yeah. Okay. This is a project. So this one will be able to go back together with some bolts. And there we go. So all the hinges are relieved. Okay, let's get these cleaned up. Well, that's very effective, but I think I also want a full respirator because it's, yeah, lots of tiny particles. Might try something different. Let's see if just sanding will deal with this. There we go, and much less aggressive. I'll still wear a respirator, but wow, that was, yeah. Well, that's working very well. I'll follow up on some finer stuff. It's going to be very fussy getting in around here. Let's see how it looks on the actual frames. Okay, well that is going to work, but it's a lot of work. Oh yeah. I'm really not looking forward to sanding this inner edge because it's up against the glass. I do not want to scratch this glass because it would be a heroic thing to get out, and it feels like it's about ½ inch thick. It's a substantial piece of glass. So I'm going to mask it and then sand very, very, very carefully. And then even then, I think I'll only hand sand it so I can be fairly careful. Okay, well this has been a piece of work. There's no doubt they're not perfect, but they're not bad. I'm going to finish up after some 220 sandpaper with some Scotch-Brite to kind of take the last of the scratch marks out here. And these will be ready to start to tarnish appropriately. Anyway, I gotta get moving because I gotta get them back in. Okay. All right, well, perhaps not ideal, but I have some 1/4 inch galvanized bolts that will deal with this at least for now, until I can get some lovely bronze bolts to replace them with. Excellent. And we have portholes again. They're actually quite lovely. Okay, I will definitely endeavor to tie these up a little more later on, but at least they're reasonable. Let's get a razor on that. Well, at least I can keep it a little bit warmer while I figure out what's going to happen next. That looks nice. Okay, before I can even consider what I'm going to do here about ceilings, and ceilings in this context is something that goes across the inside of the frames, I'm going to have to accept that I'm going to have to undo the windlass wiring and deal with the plumbing chases a bit, because through here I have to be able to run wires into the chain locker over time, and I have to probably be able to exchange them over time. So I'm going to run a pipe conduit through here that I can access from the back of the closet or hanging locker that will be back here and forward, as well as these 2 water lines are going to come to feed a sink here. So I'm just going to tidy all this up, and then I'll know what I'm going to do. So to begin with, I'll remove this accumulator, which never should have been up here to begin with. Yes, I have turned the water off. There will be some dribblage, of course. A plug and a ring. Okay. Now these hoses, or PEX pipes, are going to go down in behind here. These are the windlass wires, and yes, I know they're woefully undersized, but they're what the boat had, and they're what I'm going to work with for now. Right then, well, I had promised myself I wouldn't disconnect the wiring for the windlass, so that in the event of having to go to sea for some reason, I would still have an anchor, but it turns out I'm breaking that little promise to myself. One thing about living in the Pacific Northwest is that we're in the constant fear of something they call the big one, and that is an earthquake in the Cascadia fault offshore here that could cause a tsunami here in Victoria. Well, in fact, anywhere along the Pacific coast, but of course Victoria is the concern I have. So we always sort of have this idea that we'll keep the boats ready to go, because of course if you can get a reasonable amount offshore, that tsunami won't cause you too much grief. Living in a state of constant preparedness is not necessarily comfortable, but probably wise. Okay, so I can begin by just pulling all the wires back into the forecastle. Now the PEX pipes can't really go back, so I'm going to flex them with a little warmth, I think, or maybe not, and set them down in under here. The only risk, of course, with PEX is if you kink it, you're generally done. There we go. Good. I've got to get some insulation on these at some point, but that's got them where they're going to go. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, these stringers, which of course are absolutely integral to the strength of the boat, you'll notice are only bolted to every second frame, and they're bolted a long time ago with galvanized fasteners that I'm not sure I trust. So I'm going to add an extra fastener at each one of these connections, and add one here where there never was one, in the form of a 5/16 by 3 inch lag bolt, and that will stiffen this up and ensure that if these are getting questionable, I never have to worry about it. Drilling this will be two sizes of drills. One that is smaller than the actual threaded shank so that it can bite really well into the frames, and then one that is 5/16, which will match the shank so that there isn't too much friction in the actual stringers. And I've just set the drill into the chuck at the depth of the bolt so I don't have to worry too much about how deep I'm going. All right, let's go. And then only into the stringer with the 5/16. I love having that security. Right, so the next step is to install a chase through about here for the heavy wires for the windlass, and I'm just going to put a hole saw in through about there and then carry on through about there. Five and a half above the stringer, right about there. Now this is a bit frustrating. I've lost the screw that holds the pilot drill in my hole saw. That's not a problem. It just means I have to pre-drill it and then install the pilot bit in here as a guide, loose. Of course, the pre-drilling is required because this isn't affixed in here, so spinning it does not spin the pilot. Re-chuck up the hole saw and finish up. Excellent. And measure for some pipes. I'm gonna have to make myself a little ramp that I'll cut off later. There we go. Excellent. A nice, robust conduit to go through to the chain locker. Okay, next we're going to scour the frames for stray fasteners, but I'll take this back out again because part of the same process is going to be fixing up these little support blocks. But anyway, okay, so there we go. These are going to need to be tidied up a bit. Toe-nailed into the frames. Okay, so I can recreate that with some 18 gauge pins. I'm actually going to tack a few right through into the frame, into the planking, just to hold it in place, and then off we go. There we go. And over here. Well, that would have been a lot easier and more pleasant with a garden hose nozzle. Anyway, okay, so I've talked to you before about treating the inside of the hull with borax. Well, this is just a garden sprayer with water and as high a concentration of borax I can get. So what I do is I put it in with hot water and I stir it and stir it and stir it and stir it until it won't take any more crystals. And then it seems to stay in solution for a fair amount of time after that. So next time I make up another batch, I'll... little trouble with the sprayer. So now I just spray the whole inside of the hull with the borax solution. Now, to be fair, there has been some discussion online because the EU has banned borax because of it interfering with reproduction. Fortunately, I am past the point of worrying about reproduction, but at the same time, I suppose I should be slightly more careful with this stuff. Perhaps in future I will be. Anyway, let that soak in and dry up a little bit. So I'm sure you can see what's going on here. I'm going to use more of this V-joint tongue and groove, and I'm going to put a sealing in up to about here, and then maybe even only here, because I still haven't decided how I'm going to connect here to here. You can see there's some constraints, but getting this in place will help me figure that out. But then when I get down to this stringer, obviously I got to come out around it. Now, in some boats, I've set it up, for instance, on Zephyrus, and in fact also on Poem, where the sealing stays on the frames, and I just build a little mahogany cover over the stringers. However, because I'm using this space as sort of a chase to bring both hoses and perhaps also other wire and this main power to the windlass, I think I'm going to just basically cover these two stringers over and put the sealing basically down all the way across to at least here. At which point I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, because of course there's going to be a cabinet in here at some point which I have not even begun to design. I just wanted to get enough in here that I could see the space and then start to design it. Of course, the bulkheads are both going to get mahogany shortly, and that'll tie all this in together, and then I'll have a much better idea what I'm going to do in here. If you're interested in how the forecastle and forward head all got opened up in the first place, be sure to watch this video down here. This goes way, way back to when it was, well, as I found it. Anyway, the early gut was pretty dramatic. Okay, that's it for this week. Too wet to do anything today. We'll carry on with this tomorrow, which you'll see next week. Cheers!